afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Lifestyle with Dr. Moby. I'm Dr. Moby, and today we have great guest all the way from Vienna, Ursula.
Hi.
Thank you, Ursula, for joining our conversation. And we already started conversation because we were having great talk on how she started this company, and she's doing amazing job. I'm so excited. I told her she's my first guest on this topic. I had never had a guest. I've heard great things about these futuristic approaches where people they calculate and they come up with scenarios on different aspects, and they come up with these kind of scenarios and try to explain those strategy wise for futuristic approach. And I think it can be applied to so many topics. So Ursula, tell us about it. It's so exciting.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm so happy to be on your show. Thank you so much. So what I'm doing is called scenario planning or scenario thinking. And what is it all about? A crisis like the current one has thrown us into an ocean of uncertainties. And let's be honest, we hate uncertainty. We want to be certain. We want to have control over our life. And what I can promise you with this process is not control. I must say that, because control actually comes from a place of fear. But what I can promise you is to gain back the power over your own life. And what is a scenario thinking is a strategic process. It was invented by the US Air Force for strategic planning. What did they want to know? They wanted to know what their enemies would do. And actually, human behavior is among the most uncertain things we know. We cannot control other people. We cannot control their behavior. So, of course, they also could not foresee that. So it's actually not so much about foreseeing the future, but what they did, they came up with the idea to develop different future scenarios. What could happen? So it's usually like 4 different scenarios. And they thought about the driving forces of the enemy, what would drive them. And using these driving forces, they created critical uncertainties for the combat. And then they developed 4 different scenarios and rehearsed each and every one of these scenarios. So no matter what would happen, they would be prepared. And that, of course, was a great advantage.
And now to develop a scenario, tell me a little bit about, let's say, for example, let's take example of a political situation. Let's say for UK, or I guess that would be one, or Russia or whatever. Maybe UK is better. So let's talk about UK. So the current Boris is there, but if so, let's we have to talk about futuristic 6 months, 9 months, or how do you plan? How do we say that?
Yeah, actually, we look more than 6 months in the future in scenario thinking. We look more like 10 years ahead.
Oh.
So it would be like, okay, let's imagine, or even more, let's imagine 2040, the year 2040 for Great Britain. And maybe let's say we are a little startup in Great Britain. And we want to think about the future. Of course, you mentioned there's the political situation. So there are a lot of uncertainties now. You see, we have a current pandemic, we have a current war in Europe, etc. So you would look at all these are external factors. And as a startup, you would look at that and see, well, Boris Johnson will probably not be prime minister in 2040. But you can imagine what would drive them also as people. What would they like to see? What would we like to see in the future? What drives us? Do we want to have freedom? Do we what drives us? Is it freedom? Is it community? Is it deep human connection? And they would look at all these drivers and then determine which of these drivers are critical uncertainties of the future. As I mentioned, usually it's human behavior. You never know who. Also in politics, I did a lot of political consulting as well. You never know what the people do. Actually, you cannot control human behavior. You can try a lot, you can have a lot of campaigns and try to influence them, but in the end, you cannot predict what people really do. So you have to think, how could they behave? How could they behave? Do they prioritize more the freedom side? Do they prioritize more control? What could it be? What could Britain look like? Is it more an authoritarian state? Is it more a free state, etc.? So you think in these various different scenarios and what your startup could do in that, in a way that you can thrive in all of the scenarios. And usually we take two of the critical uncertainties. I mentioned, like freedom versus authoritarianism, for example. And the other thing would be, I don't know, for example, we develop gardening tools or something like that. Will our customers need gardening tools, or will they not need gardening tools? And then you have different scenarios, and there might be a scenario in which you are controlled by the state. Your customers do not need what you sell. So what are you going to do? Will you stay in Great Britain? Will you go to a different country, for example? It's very, very important now for businesses, also for my own businesses, to think, how will the situation develop? Do I want to stay in this country? Also, for example, a driver is taxation. Taxation in my country, for example, is very high. If I want to grow my business, do I want to stay here? Is there a scenario, can I thrive in a scenario where I pay more than 50% tax? Or do I go to a different country because I and want to grow my business there? And what are the advantages and disadvantages? And then you really go into these scenarios. You rehearse the future best together with your team. And that's also why it's a great team building exercise.
Mm-hmm.
And I already mentioned this, like, worst case scenario. You are very interesting. That's also very human.
Mm-hmm.
Pain is stronger than gain. So we are more creative in the really bad scenarios. So let's say we have a very bad scenario. We cannot sell our product. The clients don't want it. We don't have the right suppliers, etc. What can we do now? And then people come up with all kinds of ideas how to change the situation and how to get in a better situation. And of course, it can be we have to expand to another country. We have to employ other people. We have to change our product. We have to listen more to our customers. We have to find out what are their needs, etc.
Mm-hmm. Oh, very nice. So also tell me, when you develop these, is it based, which parameters from the population do you take? That, like, um, let's say, for example, we want to know the political situation or something on those lines in Europe next 15 years. Would it be based more on, economic indicators in last 5 years? Or what are how do you sample the population, or what are the important questions to
Mhm. That's
answer?
Thank you very much. That's a very good question. Usually, economists, how do they think about the future? They usually think about the future by history. They take data from yesterday or from a year ago or from 10 years ago and try to predict the future by this data. Actually, in scenario thinking or scenario planning, we are not working with this data that is measurable. We are more working with human behavior, with the data, with the things, with the factors and the driving forces that are actually not measurable. And that's actually why I love it so much. It's of great advantage because as a business, or also or as a person, or as a country, the things that are not measurable
Mhm.
are actually usually impacting you more. For example, if you and I mentioned, like, the US Air Force wanted to know what the enemy is doing. Businesses want to know what the competitor is doing. Let's not call them enemies. Let's call them
Yeah, competitive.
competitors.
Yeah. Mhm.
They want to know what the competitors are doing. And that's very hard to know. When I went to the School of Economics, that was my first question. When they told me, oh yeah, and then you have to know what the competitor is doing, my first question was, how do I know? And they were like, we don't know. So actually you'll never know, but by imagining different scenarios you still can prepare. Great examples by how important that is and how things can impact you from the sideline, like Uber, where was impacting the taxi business much more than the oil price, for example, much more. You
Mhm.
can, of course, you can calculate the oil price, but you cannot calculate competitor behavior that's coming from the sideline. Same thing with Airbnb and the hotel business. It's completely different thing, completely different behavior, and we try to work with these kind of things. How could people behave? How would my worst competitor behave? And how can I prepare for that?
So, okay, so yeah, this is a good example, like you said, Uber and BNB. So there are things change, and of course, nobody calculated COVID. You know.
Well, actually, I'm asked very often if any of my clients was prepared for a pandemic. And I worked a lot also with the Ministry of the Interior in Austria, so with security things. And actually, all the big, like, for example, energy providers, they had pandemics in their crisis plans.
Wow. Very interesting. So they had, yeah, and it doesn't surprise me because we knew that 1910 and there was flu pandemic, and the scientists were saying for last 5 years that it is due and it is gonna come anytime. So we
Mm.
knew. I mean, we heard because the virus mutates, and we knew that it's gonna. But when was the big question? One every year they were thinking that year, and just all of a sudden it just comes. You're right. Those people knew that. I mean, how they know now the next virus will again hit in 90 years from now. Absolutely, they know that. But the question is always, are we prepared on what things we can do? And the other thing is, so tell me, you were talking a little bit also about human behavior, and you said, one thing is nobody knows everything, but so one thing we read is the past history, the human behavior, and they say in last 5 years they made this, and so then that would be linear, and there are factors of course make those changes different. So it could be economic, political, or it could be anything, right? But those, I think, for let's say for Europe, yeah, I'm talking about for Brexit, you know we had that, and they were there. I mean, did they count? I'm sure they counted what would happen if some of the nations get out of Brexit or not, right?
Actually, yes, the European Commission did a future scenario process many years ago, and they were imagining 2050. And in this scenario report, they already had that kind of some countries could separate scenarios. They were thinking of that. There was actually a whole. It was called a wild card scenario or black swan. That's these scenarios are things that, like Brexit, like something that really changes a lot, everything. And they had a wildcard scenario in which the European Union actually fell apart entirely.
Oh, wow. So and now, would they have a scenario? I'm sure probably they did study. What if one country out or few country out of, they outpace everyone and they become the leader?
Yes, these are more geopolitical scenarios of scenario planners who do that, and it's usually they think yes, there are various players, And of course, you have the US, you have Russia, and you have China. And actually, now we are exactly in the situation where we have to think, what are these players doing? And it will shape the world in which we are living.
Sure, sure. I'm sure they also plan what happens if there is World War III, and then the right. Um,
Yes, actually, yes. Also, in 2018, I was developing scenarios for the future of the internet for the Austrian Ministry of Technology, and even in these scenarios, we were thinking. Of course, you were thinking about how can technology. How can technology be developed in a way that it benefits people and that it does not control people and that kind of stuff. And we actually had a scenario in which some of the young people, like 16 years, who were part of the process, said, "Well, that's actually a World War III scenario, the whole thing," and it was guided by technology. Actually, it was not so much that people would fight against each other, but much more like cyber war and attacking the systems. And actually, things like that happen now. You have it in Ukraine, you have it in Russia. So the hackers are in this war as
mm,
well. So yeah, so now we are in the really deep bad scenarios. What I would like to add, actually, we are not trying to predict the future with that, and we also do not want to threaten people. The thing is, actually, if you imagine the worst thing that can happen, you actually live a much better life because you are prepared for everything, and everything that falls short of that really worst case scenario is already something you can handle. So this is why we develop these scenarios. And it's also what I do in my work is actually I give the people the power back. It's never like, oh, I predict that it will be very, very bad. No, it's like it can be very bad, but I show you how you can still thrive in that, even if it's very, very bad, because you have your own driving forces. You can decide what to do. You have your own free will. You have your power, and actually nobody can take that away from you if you live in reality. You can only do that from a place of reality.
mhm. And you said you do beside for organization, you do for persons too, right?
Yes, I think it's not only, of course, people would say, is it only for big companies or something like that, ministries, the military, or something like that? Actually, it's for everyone who has to make a decision in uncertainty. So that's every one of us now, And even before the whole crisis started, I did that also for students, for example, if they want to decide which career path to choose or which school to choose, and it worked very well. Yeah, like students, they love to do that. They like to imagine the future. Then I I interview them from the future, and they have such huge imagination. And I love that, as you really tap into the imagination. And it's really good for if you have a difficult decision to make. I'm also teaching the whole thing, and in one of my classes there was a guy who said, "Oh yeah, this weekend I have me and my partner. We have to decide if we want to move into my house or into her apartment, and to sell the apartment or sell the house or whatever. We don't know. Can I use a methodology?" And was like, yes, of course. You have to think about your drivers. What do you expect? What is your driver? Why do you want to keep the house? Why do you want to move to the apartment, or the other way around? And probably you are not on one page now, because otherwise you could have decided with your partner. So
Mm,
let's bring you on one page. And actually was really great. We
mhm,
did that like in this case, a weekend. You can do it faster, like in 90 minutes. And but it's already quite short, but it can be done. And after this weekend, they actually really knew what to do. They both were on the same in the same place, on the same page. And then they decided what they wanted to do. And I love these stories. And also, as I mentioned, when I do this with students, as I did that the very first time, It was the daughter of a friend of mine. She was 13, and the whole family was desperate because in Austria at 13, you have to choose if you want to stay at the school where you are or to go to another school. And she didn't know. She didn't know. The girl didn't know. The whole family was desperate. And I said, well, that's a decision problem, and I have a process for that. If she wants to try that, let's do that one Saturday, 10 to 4. Let's do it. And we did it. And at the end of the day, her mother came and says, "Do you know which school to go now?" And I said, "Well, she actually knows very well what she wants." And the mother was, "But Hannah, this is her name. You told me you don't know." And the girl said, "Yes, mom. Until today, I didn't know, but now I do." So this was really, really rewarding for me.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it is rewarding. So also, I'm sure you had some also coming to your show and asking or discussing with you about their partner or something. They're not confused whether they should get married or not, or they should have this. I'm sure you have these ones too, right? So
Yes.
I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Also, tell us my, how to get hold of you. Is there, you have a website and you had something you wanted to announce? So go ahead.
Thank you very much. Yes. So my website is www.redswan.at. And I would like to offer something exclusively to your listeners. I'm doing this actually for the very first time. I would like to offer 3 90-minute free coaching sessions with me for any decision problem you have. I'm offering this to the first ones who write me to office@redswan.at. Just tell me I'm in for the free session and explain shortly to me why you would like to want to have that.
Okay, well, that is amazing. Thank you, and it was such an interesting topic, and I think we could have carried this show for next another hour. But I know it's important. So, anyways, good luck, and it is
Thank
really interesting, and
you as well.
I'll be availing your free session too, and also your client. So,
Thank you very much. It was a
take care.
pleasure.
Let's take care.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Have a nice day. Bye bye.
Yeah, thank you. And she's from Vienna, and anytime you want to visit Vienna, she's the best. So,
Very
so
welcome. We are very proud of Vienna.
we are okay. Well, thank you. Take care, Ursula. Take care. Thank
Take care. Thank you so
you.
much for
Bye.
having me. Bye
Bye.
bye. It was a
Bye.
pleasure.